The elevator was falling. 46 floors of open shaft beneath her feet, and Madeline Prescott, CEO of a billion-dollar aerospace company, was going to die in the building she owned. Her 5 elite bodyguards were on the wrong floor. The security director was already pointing fingers, and the only person moving toward the danger was a 37-year-old maintenance worker nobody had bothered to learn the name of. Cole Vance had spent 3 years being invisible inside Northstar Aeronautics. In the next 4 minutes, he was going to save a woman's life and destroy every lie he'd built his quiet world upon. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, now is the time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Press the like button if you're already hooked, and drop a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now stay with me because this one is just getting started. The morning Cole Vance reported the malfunctioning door on the 46th floor. He was running 4 minutes late, not because anything dramatic had happened. His daughter Lily had spilled orange juice across the kitchen counter at 7:15, and by the time he'd cleaned it up, found her clean socks, double-checked that her lunch bag had the right sandwich. She hated turkey on Thursdays, always chicken, and walked her the 2 blocks to the school bus stop. His window had closed. He drove the company van 5 miles over the limit the entire way to Northstar Aeronautics and still clocked in at 7:56 instead of 7:52. 4 minutes. His supervisor, Doug Merritt, made a face when he saw the tablet. 46th floor security door's been throwing a fault code since yesterday, Doug said, not looking up. Kincaid's people need it cleared before the demonstration this morning. I'll get it done. It needs to be done before 9. They're running an executive protection drill up there, and nobody wants a maintenance worker in the middle of it. Cole took the work order without comment and loaded his bag with the tools he'd need. Electronic door assembly, fault code reset, possible sensor replacement if the calibration was off. Straightforward job, 45 minutes at most. He'd be gone before anyone noticed him. That was how he preferred things. Northstar Aeronautics occupied the top 14 floors of a glass and steel tower in the financial district, and the 46th floor belonged entirely to the executive suite. Cole had been up there maybe a dozen times in 3 years, always for maintenance requests that came through official channels, always at off hours when the hallways were quiet. The executives didn't interact with maintenance staff. The security personnel tolerated them, the way they tolerated the cleaning crew necessary. Invisible, not worth acknowledging. Cole was fine with that. He took the service elevator to 44, transferred to the main corridor, and walked the remaining 2 flights via the stairwell rather than wait for the executive elevator bank. The 46th floor had a different quality of silence than the rest of the building. Thicker carpet, air that smelled faintly of leather, and filtered circulation, kind of quiet that costs money to maintain. The malfunctioning door was at the far end of the executive corridor, a reinforced security door that connected the main hallway to the internal conference wing. Cole set his bag down, pulled out his diagnostic tablet, and got to work. He was 3 minutes into the fault code analysis when the voices started. They were coming from the main executive hub around the corner, loud, practiced, the kind of voices that were used to filling rooms. Cole recognized the cadence of security personnel running through a rehearsal, caught fragments as he worked. Primary route is compromised. We redirect to the secondary elevator bank. CEO stays between positions 2 and 4 at all times. If communications go down, Chen takes point, Morrison covers the rear. Tuned it out and focused on the door sensor, which had developed a misalignment in the locking mechanism that was causing it to throw a false fault code every time it registered more than 40 pounds of lateral pressure on the frame. Simple fix. He'd seen it before on the 32nd floor. Then he heard a different voice. Cleaner, younger. Impatient in the specific way of someone who was used to being the most competent person in most rooms and had learned to live with the tedium of demonstrating it. Can we move past the corridor blocking sequence? We've rehearsed it 3 times. Ms. Prescott, the repetition is the point. Muscle memory in an emergency situation. I understand muscle memory, Director Kincaid. I also understand that I have a board call at 11 and a contract review at 1. Can we get to the elevator sequence? Cole recognized the name. Madeline Prescott. He'd seen her twice, once in the lobby when she'd walked through with an entourage, moving fast enough to create its own weather system, and once from a distance through a conference room window. 30 years old, the kind of young that made the business press uncomfortable because They didn't have a comfortable box for a woman that age running a defense contractor of Northstar's size. She'd taken over from her father 18 months ago when he'd had a stroke, and from what Cole could gather from breakroom conversation, she'd spent those 18 months proving that the company hadn't made a mistake. He went back to the sensor calibration. The demonstration sounds continued around the corner. He could hear Travis Kincaid's voice directing the 5-man security detail through the elevator sequence, which routes to use, which to avoid, where the CEO would position herself, how long each stage should take. Kincaid had a methodical, authoritative quality to his instruction. He clearly knew his material. Cole finished the recalibration, ran a test cycle on the door, and started packing his tools. That was when one of the security personnel came around the corner and stopped. The man was built for intimidation, wide through the shoulders, mid-40s, the kind of flat, professional expression that security contractors practiced in mirrors. His name tag read Morrison. He looked at Cole the way certain people look at furniture that has been moved without their permission. "You're not supposed to be up here." "Work order," Cole said, and held up the tablet without making it into anything. Morrison looked at the tablet, then at Cole, then at the diagnostic equipment. "You need to clear this area. We're running a restricted demonstration." "I'm done, just closing up." "Then close up faster." Cole zipped his bag. He was reaching for the shoulder strap when 2 more of the security detail came around the corner, followed by Travis Kincaid himself. And behind Kincaid, Madeline Prescott. She was shorter than he'd expected from a distance. 5'4", maybe 5'5", with dark hair pulled back practically, and the kind of posture that came from spending years in rooms where people were always watching to see if you'd flinch. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and carrying a tablet of her own, and she was reading something on it even as she walked, which explained why she nearly walked into Cole before she registered him. She stopped, looked up. "Sorry," Cole said, stepping aside. She looked at him the way people look at things they've nearly tripped over briefly, cataloging the obstacle, moving on. Then she looked at the door he'd been working on and back at him. "Is it fixed?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She was already looking back at her tablet. Kincaid put himself between Cole and Madeline with the smooth efficiency of someone who had done it reflexively for years. "This area is restricted during the demonstration window. Maintenance should have been notified." "They were," Cole said. "Work orders time-stamped 6:45 this morning. I was told to have it done before 9. "It's 8:53, Kincaid said. "I'm aware." One of the other guards, younger, with the particular smirk of someone who was auditioning for an audience, said, "Maybe next time read the schedule before you wander into restricted zones." Cole looked at him without expression, picked up his bag, and turned to leave. He'd taken 4 steps toward the stairwell when the lights changed. It wasn't a flicker. It was a specific kind of shift. The overhead fluorescence held steady, but the accent lighting along the corridor baseboards went from blue-white to amber. Cole recognized it because he'd seen it before during building systems testing. Amber meant the emergency protocols had engaged. He stopped walking. Behind him, he heard Kincaid say, "That's not part of the drill." Then the elevator chime sounded not the normal ascending tone, but 3 descending notes that meant the executive elevator bank had switched to emergency lockdown. Cole had read the building systems manual when he'd first been assigned to the executive floors. He'd read all the building systems manuals. It was the kind of thing he did. 3 descending notes meant the elevators had gone to automated safety mode. Automated safety mode had a manual override at the 46th floor panel. Automated safety mode also had a fault condition that, if the backup brakes had been compromised, could send a car into uncontrolled descent. He turned back around. Madeline Prescott was no longer standing behind Travis Kincaid. "Where is she?" Cole said. Kincaid looked at him with the expression of a man who had not yet processed the idea that the maintenance worker's question was worth answering. "Excuse me, where is Miss Prescott?" The younger guard, the one who'd made the comment about reading schedules, said, "She went to take the executive elevator to the lobby. It was the next stage of the..." He stopped, looked at the amber baseboards. Cole was already moving. He went past Kincaid before the security director could react, past the younger guard, around the corner and down the executive corridor at a run that surprised the 2 remaining guards enough that neither of them moved in time to stop him. The executive elevator bank was at the corridor's end, 3 brushed steel doors, each with a status panel above them. The left and center cars showed locked. The right car, the CEO car, the one with the extra security features and the dedicated communications line, showed active and descending. Cole hit the call panel, nothing. He hit the emergency stop. The panel returned an error code he recognized. The car's emergency stop had been disabled at the mechanical level, not the software level. Someone had physically bypassed it. The status display showed the car at 43 and dropping. Pulled the panel cover off the wall, not the public-facing part. The service access that maintenance workers used as executives never noticed NISTIS and looked at the relay configuration inside. The backup brake circuit had been cut. Not worn through. Cut. Clean diagonal slice through the insulation. 42. Dropping. Kincaid came around the corner with 2 of his men. Step away from that panel. The backup brakes are cut, Cole said. Car is in free descent. Where is your mechanical override for this bank? Kincaid stared at the panel. Something moved behind his eyes, something Cole couldn't read in the half-second he had to look. The main control room, 32nd floor, that's too slow. Cole had already looked at the service access diagram that he'd memorized, because that was what he did with building systems diagrams. There was a maintenance shaft access point 8 feet to his left. The shaft ran parallel to the elevator track and had a service platform at every 5th floor. If he could get into the shaft and reach the car's roof. 41. Cole opened the shaft access panel. Stop, Kincaid said sharply. You don't have authorization. Cole looked at him. She has about 90 seconds before that car hits the mechanical floor buffer at the bottom, and that buffer hasn't been rated for uncontrolled descent. He knew that because he'd flagged the buffer inspection as overdue in a maintenance report 6 weeks ago. The report had been marked reviewed, and no action had been taken. He went into the shaft. The maintenance shaft was 31 inches wide and smelled of machine oil and concrete dust. A metal ladder ran its length, and Cole went down it fast, hand over hand, feet barely touching the rungs. He could hear the elevator car descending in the adjacent track, a sound that shouldn't have been possible to distinguish from normal operation, but was, because normal operation had a controlled rhythm and this didn't. This had the particular quality of something falling. He hit the service platform at the 40th floor and pulled himself onto it. Through the narrow inspection port in the shaft wall, he could see the top of the elevator car, 8 feet below him and dropping. He had one shot at this. Cole pulled the emergency brake actuator from his tool bag. He'd been carrying it because the diagnostic work order had included a note about checking the emergency brake assembly on elevator. Car 3, the car currently in free descent, and he'd packed it out of habit. He'd learned a long time ago to trust habits. He rigged a line to the platform railing, calculated the distance with the part of his brain that did those calculations without being asked, and dropped onto the top of the elevator car as it passed the service platform. The landing was not graceful. He hit the car roof hard, knees absorbing the impact, one hand grabbing the maintenance handhold that every elevator car had on its roof, and most people never thought about. Car shuddered but kept descending. He found the emergency brake actuator housing and pulled it open. The wiring inside had been cut in 2 places, the same clean diagonal cuts as the relay panel upstairs. This wasn't improvised. Someone had planned this, prepared for it, known exactly which components to disable and in which order to make it look like a cascade failure rather than deliberate sabotage. Cole pulled wire from his bag. He carried wire always and bridged the first cut. 38th floor marker on the shaft wall passing. He bridged the second cut. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the emergency brake engaged with a sound like a gunshot, and the elevator car lurched so violently that Cole lost his grip and slid 4 inches toward the edge of the roof, before his boot found a bracket and stopped him. Car decelerated. Not stopped, slowed, the brakes fighting momentum, scraping down the track rails with a sound that Cole could feel in his back teeth, but slowing. They stopped at 36. Cole found the service hatch in the car roof, a square panel, 18 by 18 inches, with a release lever on his side. Pulled it, and looked down into the elevator car. Madeline Prescott was standing in the center of the car, with her back against the rear wall, and both hands flat against the paneling. She was breathing hard. Her face had the particular pallor of someone who had been genuinely, viscerally frightened, and her eyes were wide, but she wasn't crying, and she wasn't frozen. She was looking at the ceiling hatch like she was trying to decide what it meant. She looked up at Cole. He looked down at her. "Are you hurt?" he said. She checked herself quickly the way someone does who actually wants an accurate answer rather than a reassuring one. "No. I need you to climb up through this hatch. There's a maintenance platform we can transfer to. Car's not stable." She looked at the hatch opening. Looked at him. "You're the maintenance worker." "Yes." A pause. Outside the car, the emergency brakes were still under load, and Cole could hear the mechanical stress in the track housing. He didn't know how long they'd hold. "Okay," Madeline said. She was not a tall woman, and the hatch was not a generous opening, but she got herself up through it without asking for help until the last 18 inches, when Cole grabbed her wrist and pulled. They scrambled onto the service platform at the 36th floor, and Cole got the shaft access door open and pushed her through into the maintenance corridor beyond. Then he went back and recovered his tool bag, because he'd learned not to leave evidence of what he knew how to do. The maintenance corridor on 36 was a narrow concrete passage that ran behind the elevator bank. A single fluorescent tube buzzed overhead. Madeline Prescott was standing in the middle of it with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and she was looking at Cole with an expression he recognized, the expression of someone reassembling their composure after it had nearly shattered, refusing to let the reassembly show too much. "The elevator failure," she said. "Was that an accident?" Cole set his tool bag down and checked the shaft access door to confirm it was sealed. "No." "You're certain?" Both the relay panel upstairs and the brake assembly in the car were cut with a blade. Same angle, same method. "That's not equipment failure." She was quiet for a moment. Somewhere above them, he could hear the distant sound of the security detail mobilizing. "Who are you?" she said. "Cole Vance. Building maintenance, elevator, and mechanical systems." "That's not what I'm asking." He looked at her. She was looking at him with the particular steadiness of someone who had learned to read the difference between what people said and what they meant. "I know," he said. He didn't explain further. He picked up his bag, moved to the far end of the corridor, and started checking the ventilation access panel that ran along the maintenance wall. Because the relay upstairs had been sabotaged and the brake assembly in the car had been sabotaged, and those were two separate systems accessed through two separate points, which meant someone had been inside the building's infrastructure. And if they'd been in two places, Cole needed to know if they'd been in three. He found the third device 40 seconds later, tucked behind the ventilation grill, a small electronic unit with a timer display that he recognized from a specific period of his life he had spent 9 years trying to forget. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked back at Madeline Prescott, who had followed him down the corridor and was standing 3 feet behind him. "We need to move," he said quietly. "Right now." "What is that?" "It means the elevator wasn't the plan." He straightened. It was the test run. She held his gaze. Her breathing was controlled and deliberate, the way someone breathes when they're afraid and won't let the fear make decisions for them. "Where are we going?" she said. Cole thought of Lily. Of the lunch bag with the chicken sandwich for Thursday. Of the school bus stop 2 blocks from their apartment. Then he thought of the device behind the grill and the clean diagonal cuts in the wiring, and the fact that whoever had done this had known exactly which systems to hit and in exactly which sequence. "Somewhere they don't have a map to," he said. He moved down the corridor, and after a half-second, Madeline Prescott followed. The maintenance corridors behind the elevator banks were not designed for 2 people moving together. They were built for solitary workers with tool bags and no urgency, and the layout reflected that narrow enough that Cole's shoulders came within 2 inches of the walls on either side, lit by fluorescent tubes on 10-foot intervals, with floor markings stenciled in fading orange paint that indicated utility zones rather than destinations. Madeline followed a half-step behind him, close enough that he could hear her breathing, and she was working hard to keep that breathing controlled. She wasn't complaining. He registered that. They moved down 2 floors via the service stairwell, a concrete shaft that smelled of rust and old paint, with metal handrails that had been installed sometime in the previous decade and hadn't been inspected since. Cole went first, one hand on the railing, the other holding his bag close so it didn't swing and catch on anything. Counted the landings without thinking about it, the way he counted things by reflex always had. 34, he stopped and pulled his radio from his belt. The building's internal communications channel returned static. He tried the secondary. More static, but underneath it, a faint repeating tone that he recognized as a jamming signal low frequency, the kind that blanketed a specific range without being obvious on a standard spectrum scan. Someone had shut down internal communications in a 16-floor radius, and they'd done it quietly enough that the main security desk likely hadn't registered it as deliberate interference yet. They would, eventually. But eventually was not useful right now. Put the radio back and looked at Madeline. "Your phone," he said. She'd already tried it. No signal. "I noticed when we left the corridor. They're running a jammer." Building-specific frequency range. Stared at him. How do you know what a jammer signature sounds like? Static has texture, he said, and started moving again before she could follow up on it. He heard her exhale behind him, not quite frustration, not quite acceptance, and then her footsteps picked up his pace. The 34th floor was not an executive floor. It was mid-building infrastructure server rooms, secondary HVAC routing, the kind of institutional space that existed to support the floors above and below it, and had no identity of its own. Corridors were wider here, the lighting better, and Cole pushed through a fire door into the main passage and stopped to get his bearings. He needed to assess what he knew. He knew the elevator sabotage had been deliberate and professionally executed. He knew communications were jammed. He knew there was a third device in the ventilation system behind the grill in the Galan 36, which he'd left in place because disturbing it without knowing what it was connected to could trigger something worse. He knew whoever had planted these things had access to Northstar's building systems infrastructure, not executive-level access, not the kind you got with a keycard and a management title, but operational access, the kind that came from knowing how the building actually functioned beneath the surface. That narrowed things. He also knew the device behind the grill had a timer display, which meant it was running toward something. He hadn't been close enough to read the time remaining. Madeline was standing 2 feet away, watching him process all of this with the focused patience of someone who had learned when to let silence do its work. She was putting things together herself. He could see it in her face, the slight tension at the corners of her eyes, the way her hands weren't quite still. The demonstration this morning, she said. Travis's team rehearsed the evacuation route 3 times. I heard. Anyone listening would have known exactly where I'd be and when. Cole looked at her. She'd gotten there faster than he'd expected, though he wasn't sure why he'd expected anything different. Yes, that means whoever did this either had access to the demonstration schedule, or they were in the building this morning listening to the rehearsal. She paused. Or both. He didn't answer that directly. He pulled the building schematics from his tablet. He had the relevant floors saved locally, because connectivity wasn't always reliable in the maintenance corridors, and he'd learned to keep reference material offline and oriented himself. We need to find a hardwired communications point, he said. Something that doesn't go through the building's main wireless network. There's one on 32, in the technical operations room. It runs on a dedicated line that was installed during the original construction and was never migrated to the central system. How do you know that? I repaired the conduit for it 8 months ago. Water damage from a pipe that ran above it. The installation crew patched the pipe but didn't check the conduit, so I flagged it in the maintenance log and fixed it myself. She looked at him with an expression that was harder to read than most. Not suspicion, exactly. More like recalibration, the adjustment a person makes when they realize they've been holding an incomplete picture of something. You read the building specifications, she said. All of them. Why? He'd been asked that before by a different supervisor in a different context. He'd given the same answer he gave now. Because if something goes wrong, you need to know how things were supposed to work. She seemed to consider that, and then she nodded once, like a period at the end of a sentence. They moved toward the stairwell. They were at 33 when Cole heard voices in the corridor below. He stopped, put out his arm to stop Madeline without touching her. She pulled up short on her own, a fraction of a second before his arm got there, which told him her situational awareness was better than average. He listened. 2 voices. Male. Not the specific cadence of building staff or security personnel doing their jobs. Something else, short sentences. Functional. The particular economy of speech between people who'd worked together long enough to not need connective language. Cole eased the stairwell door open a centimeter. The corridor below was visible through the gap. 2 men, both in Northstar Aeronautics maintenance coveralls. One of them was holding a radio handset, pressing buttons in a sequence that Cole recognized as an override code for the building's secondary communications panel. The other was watching the corridor in both directions, with the posture of someone maintaining a perimeter rather than performing a task. Coveralls were wrong. The fit was off, too uniform, too clean for men who'd been doing physical work in utility spaces, and neither of them was carrying a tool bag of any kind. Cole had spent 3 years around the actual maintenance staff of this building. He knew what they looked like. He let the door ease closed. He turned to Madeline. He kept his voice low, nearly no voice at all. 2 men, 32nd floor corridor, section C. They're blocking the route to the technical operations room. She leaned close enough that he could see the specific controlled quality of her expression, trying to give nothing away, to keep fear from becoming something that changed her decision-making. Can we go around them? There's an alternate route through the Eastern Service Passage, but it adds 8 minutes and it runs past the secondary ventilation hub. He paused. I don't know what else is in that ventilation system. Process that quickly. So the direct route has 2 men between us and the communications terminal, and the alternate route may have devices we don't know about. Yes, those aren't good options. No, he agreed. She was quiet for 2 seconds, which Cole had already come to understand was how long Madeline Prescott needed to reach a decision she was prepared to commit to. What do you need to get past them? A distraction. He looked at the door, then back at her. And stay behind me. Whatever happens, don't move toward them. I'm not going to stand in a stairwell while you. I need you behind me, he said. Not sharp, not a command. Just the flat statement of a specific operational requirement. I can manage 2 if I'm not managing position on you at the same time. She held his gaze. He could see her working through several responses, selecting the practical one. Fine. But I'm not staying in this stairwell alone. You won't be. He reached into his tool bag and pulled out a metal coupling heavy, about 1.5 pounds, the kind used in conduit assemblies. He handed it to her. If anyone gets past me that isn't me, throw that and run for the floor above. Lock yourself in any room with a deadbolt and stay until you hear official emergency response personnel. Took the coupling, turned it over once. And if I can't tell the difference, the real emergency responders will announce themselves and try the handle. The other kind won't. He could see she didn't love that answer, but she kept the coupling. Cole opened the stairwell door and stepped into the corridor. What happened next took 11 seconds. Cole counted it afterward, the way he always counted things, not deliberately, just the internal clock that had never fully shut off. He walked toward the 2 men at a normal maintenance pace, tool bag in hand, like someone who belonged on that floor and had somewhere specific to be. The man watching the corridor saw him at about 30 feet and straightened. The one working the communications panel looked up. This area's restricted, the corridor watcher said. Got a work order for the panel, Cole said, holding up his tablet without stopping walking. The man's hand moved toward his jacket, not quite reaching for something, but pre-reaching the slight shift of weight and shoulder that meant a hand was about to go somewhere deliberate. Cole was at 15 feet. At 12 feet, the man's hand completed its motion, and Cole was already adjusting his line and his timing. He didn't describe what happened later. Not to Madeline, not to anyone. He handled the corridor watcher first, because the corridor watcher had committed to a reach, and that commitment created a window. The second man was faster, and had better instincts than his partner, which Cole registered and respected and used against him by letting him close the distance rather than fighting it. The second man's momentum became part of the solution. 11 seconds. Both men were on the ground. Neither of them was unconscious. Cole had been precise, targeting joints and leverage points rather than anything that could cause lasting damage, but neither of them was getting up in the next 3 minutes, which was what he needed. He checked them quickly. They were armed. He removed the weapons without taking them, disabled them, and set them against the far wall. He took the radio handset from the first man and pocketed it. Madeline had come through the stairwell door. She was standing in the corridor with the metal coupling in her hand and an expression that had moved past shock into something more complicated, the specific look of someone who has just seen something that doesn't fit the category they had assigned it to. Cole moved to the communications panel. The man had been trying to lock it out, but he hadn't gotten there yet. Cole cleared the override sequence and pulled up the building's hardwired line. He handed the handset to Madeline. Make the call. She took it. Started to dial, then stopped. Looked at him. Who are you? He was watching the corridor in both directions. Told you. You told me your name. That's not what I'm asking. She gestured toward the 2 men on the floor. Building maintenance workers don't know how to do that. Call the police first. The building's internal security may be compromised. Cole. He looked at her. She wasn't frightened of him. He checked for that, because it mattered. Because he'd seen what happened when people who should be working together became afraid of each other. She wasn't frightened. She was demanding the accounting she was owed, and she was right to demand it. Call first, he said. I'll explain what I can. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she dialed. The hardwired line connected, and Madeline spoke quickly and precisely her company name, her position, the floor number, the nature of the emergency. She described the elevator sabotage, the jamming signal, the armed men. She didn't editorialize, and she didn't repeat herself. Cole watched the corridor and listened to her do it. And whatever remaining questions he'd had about her capacity to function under pressure, she answered them. When she finished, he took the handset back and disabled the line. Leaving it active was a signal. They said 12 minutes for emergency response, Madeline said. 12 minutes was a long time. We need to move, Cole said. We can't stay near the men on the floor. When their contact doesn't hear from them, they'll know something went wrong. She was already moving toward the stairwell. Where? Cole thought about it. He needed somewhere defensible, somewhere accessible to emergency response when it arrived, and somewhere not already factored into whatever operational plan was running in this building. The executive floors were compromised. Someone had been through the infrastructure up there, and they knew those routes. The lower floors were where emergency response would funnel in. The middle floors were the problem. Except for one specific space that wasn't on the building's public schematic, that didn't appear on the executive security maps, and that Cole had spent 40 minutes alone in last February repairing a leaking radiant heat pipe. There's a technical service room on 31, he said. Old infrastructure, it was built for the original tenant's server bank before Northstar took the building. They walled off the entrance when they redesigned the floor plan, but there's still a maintenance access point from the utility corridor. You know how to get to it, yes. Of course you do, she said, but it wasn't sarcasm. It was something closer to exhausted acknowledgement. She followed him into the stairwell. They reached the service room on 31, without incident, which bothered Cole more than running into someone would have. Quiet in an active situation didn't mean safe. It meant he didn't have enough information yet. The room was approximately 20 feet by 15, a concrete-walled space with exposed conduit overhead and two large, decommissioned equipment racks against the far wall. Cole used his maintenance key to lock the access point behind them. He set his bag on one of the equipment racks and did a systematic check of what he had. Madeline sat on an overturned equipment case and watched him. She'd put the metal coupling down on the rack beside her, but hadn't moved far from it. He pulled out water, he carried water, always had, old habit, and handed her one of the two bottles. Thank you, she said. She drank, then set the bottle down carefully. You said you'd explain. He'd known it was coming. He'd been running the calculations since she'd asked in the corridor, and he'd known the shape of what he would say and what he would leave out. He sat on the equipment rack across from her. I was in the Navy, he said. I left 9 years ago. What did you do in the Navy? Operational work. She looked at him steadily. That's not an explanation. It's what I can give you right now. She considered pushing. He could see the impulse, and he could also see her set it aside, which took self-discipline in a situation like this one. Why maintenance work? After whatever operational work was. Cole looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. My wife died 4 years ago. I have a daughter. She's 8. I needed work that kept me on the ground and kept me close. He said it without ornamentation, the way he usually said it. He'd had enough conversations where people wanted to make it into a story, the sacrifice, the love, the tragedy, and he'd learned that the more he let them build a narrative around it, the further the actual facts got from what was true. What was true was simple. Lily needed a father who came home, and Cole had made the math work. Madeline didn't try to make it into a story. She nodded once, looking at him the way she'd looked at him before that reassessment quality, taking something apart and putting it back together with the new information included. Your daughter, she said. She's at school right now? Yes. Does she know about the operational work? No. Another pause. Madeline turned the water bottle in her hands. The men outside, the jamming, the elevator. Someone planned this across multiple systems and multiple access points. That's not a simple operation. No, it's a coordinated one. She looked at him. When you saw the device in the ventilation grill, you recognized the technology. He hadn't said that. But he hadn't said it in a way that she'd apparently read clearly enough. He held her gaze. I recognized the type. From the operational work. From something adjacent to it. The silence between them had weight to it. Outside the room, somewhere in the building above them, whatever was running was still running. The timer on the ventilation device was still counting. Cole had no way to know toward what. Travis Kincaid, Madeline said quietly. Cole looked at her. He designed the demonstration, she said. He chose the routes. He chose which elevator I'd use for the sequence. He had the schedule, he had the access, and he was the one who told me the demonstration was mandatory after I tried to move it to next week. She stopped, set the water bottle down. I have an internal audit scheduled. It starts Monday. It covers defense contract procurement over the last 3 years. Cole didn't say anything. I approved it 2 weeks ago. Travis was informed. She looked at the middle distance between them. If the audit finds what I think it's going to find, what do you think it's going to find? She met his eyes. I don't know exactly. But someone inside Northstar has been routing classified systems contracts through shell vendors, and the amounts are significant enough that when it surfaces, whoever is responsible is looking at federal charges. She paused. I signed off on the audit personally. Travis was copied. Cole absorbed that. He thought about the device in the ventilation grill. He thought about the clean diagonal cuts in the wiring, the same method, the same tool, the same hand. He thought about the 2 men in the coveralls who had no tool bags and weren't building staff. They weren't trying to steal information, he said. No, they were trying to stop the audit before it started. He looked at the access door behind them and framed it as a building systems failure. Accidental death. The words sat in the room between them. Madeline didn't look away from it. She squared herself against it the way Cole had watched her. Square herself against everything else in the last 40 minutes, not by pretending it wasn't there, but by deciding it wasn't going to make her decisions for her. There was something in that quality that he recognized without quite being able to name. He checked his watch. 8 minutes until emergency response, if they were on schedule. That was when they both heard it, not voices, not footsteps, but the specific sound of the access corridor's air pressure changing. The way sound moves differently when a door somewhere in a connected passage has opened. Someone was in the utility corridor. Cole stood. He moved to the access point and put 2 fingers against the door surface, feeling for vibration. There were multiple people in the corridor. More than 2. He turned back to Madeline and held up 4 fingers. She stood up from the equipment case. She picked up the metal coupling, not because he'd told her to, but because she'd made her own calculation about what was useful. He found a certain specific quality to that, standing in a concrete room in the middle of a building that someone was trying to use as a killing ground. He filed it away without examining it, the way he filed most things that required a different kind of time. The door handle moved. Cole positioned himself. They weren't getting to her. That was the only calculation that mattered right now, and he'd already done it, and the answer was simple. They were not getting to her. The door handle moved a second time, then stopped. Cole had positioned himself against the wall beside the access point, not in front of it, not where someone pushing through would expect a person to be standing. He had his back flat against the concrete and his weight balanced forward on the balls of his feet. He'd set his tool bag on the equipment rack behind him where it wouldn't catch his legs. Madeline was at the far end of the room, back against the decommissioned equipment rack, with the metal coupling in her right hand. She'd positioned herself at an angle to the door rather than directly behind him, which meant she'd thought about sight lines. He didn't know if she'd done it deliberately or by instinct, but either way, it was the right choice. The door didn't open. Instead, a voice came through it, muffled by the concrete and the metal framing, but audible. Male. Controlled. Vance. I know you're in there. The thermal scanner picked up 2 heat signatures 12 minutes ago. Cole said nothing. I'm not here to negotiate with you. I need Ms. Prescott to come with me, so we can get her to a safe location before the building response arrives. There are still active threats on multiple floors. The voice was professional and calm, and if Cole hadn't spent years learning to parse the specific quality of communication between people who were being sincere and people who were performing sincerity, he might have found it credible. Tell was in the framing, I need Ms. Prescott to come with me, not we need to get you both out. The separation was deliberate, and the speaker probably didn't realize he'd made it. Madeline was looking at Cole across the room. He shook his head once. Minimal. She understood. We have emergency response inbound, Cole said through the door. 5 minutes. A pause. There are complications with the external response. The building's emergency signal has been routed through the compromised communications network. I can't guarantee they receive the full situation report. Then we'll wait and see. Another pause longer. Vance. I know who you are. I know what you used to do. I'm telling you as a professional that the situation outside this room is more complicated than you think, and the safest thing for everyone is to open this door. Cole looked at the door. He was running the geometry of what he knew 4 people in the corridor, based on the pressure change he'd felt, one of them now talking, which meant 3 maintaining positions. The access point opened inward, which gave him a fraction of a second of engagement window when it moved. The room was 20 by 15 with 2 equipment racks and a single overhead light, which told him something about the thermal scanner comment. If they'd had a functioning high-grade scanner, they wouldn't have needed to announce themselves. They'd have known exactly where in the room he and Madeline were standing. The scanner comment was a bluff, which meant they weren't certain what was behind the door, and they were trying to get someone to confirm it. Cole picked up a length of conduit from the equipment rack, 18 inches, steel, one of the spares he'd been meaning to return to the supply room, and held it in his left hand. Kept his right hand free. Last chance, the voice said. I heard you the first time, Cole said. The door came in hard. The first man through was moving fast and angled low, which was correct technique for a confined entry. It made him a smaller target and got him past the door frame quickly. He was expecting resistance from the front of the room. Cole was beside the door frame, 18 inches from the man's left shoulder as he came through. Cole used the conduit against the man's lead knee, not the joint itself, the outer edge of the quad above it, which locked the leg and took the man's weight distribution apart without doing structural damage. The man went down awkwardly, and Cole was already past him, moving into the door frame to meet the second man who was coming through on a half-beat delay. The second man was larger and had anticipated something going wrong. He'd pulled up short when the first man dropped, which cost him momentum but gave him reaction time. He and Cole met in the door frame, and it was not clean or controlled. The man had real training, and he used it. Cole took a hit to the left forearm that was meant for his throat and gave up 2 steps of ground before he found the angle he needed and used the door frame itself as a pivot point. Put the second man into the wall. The third man had held position in the corridor smart, and Cole registered him in his peripheral vision, already setting his stance. But behind Cole, Madeline had moved from the equipment rack. He heard the sharp crack of the metal coupling against something, and the third man's stance broke, and he dropped, grabbing at his shoulder. Cole looked back. Madeline was standing 3 feet from the door. Her arm was at her side, the coupling still in her hand. She'd thrown it no. She'd swung it, stepping into the corridor to get the angle, which meant she'd moved toward the threat rather than away from it. She looked at him. Her face was white, and her hand was shaking slightly, and her jaw was set, like she was daring him to comment on the hand. There was a fourth, she said. He went the other way down the corridor. Cole checked the 2 men in the room down, neither unconscious, both going to be there for a few minutes, and checked the man in the corridor. He was sitting against the wall with one hand pressed to his shoulder, and his face arranged into the specific expression of someone recalculating their situation. Cole looked at Madeline. You moved into the corridor. He was about to come through the door behind you. I told you to stay against the wall. I know what you told me. He held her gaze for a moment. She held it back, not apologizing, not explaining further. He filed that too. The fourth went up or down, he said. Up. That meant toward the executive floors. Then we go down. Now. She dropped the coupling and followed him into the corridor. They moved fast and without talking, which was the correct approach to a stairwell when you didn't know who was on the floors you were passing and didn't want to spend time finding out. Cole went first with his hand on the rail and his eyes on the space below each landing before committing his weight to it. Madeline matched his pace without instruction, keeping 2 steps behind him, not crowding. At 29, they heard the first external sound that wasn't internal to the building, a distant wail of emergency response vehicles, the kind of sound that bends around concrete and glass and arrives muffled and late. Cole stopped on the landing and listened. They're coming, Madeline said. They're outside. It'll take them time to get through building access and up to the relevant floors. He checked the time. The 12-minute window she'd been given had passed. Whoever called in external interference on the emergency signal didn't fully close the loop, or they're letting emergency response arrive on purpose. He looked at her. If I'm found dead in a building system's failure, that's one outcome, she said. If I disappear during a building emergency with all communications compromised and multiple incidents happening simultaneously, that's harder to explain, but it buys time. She met his eyes. Travis needs time, not to kill me here necessarily, to move the evidence. Cole thought about that. He thought about the audit documents, the contract procurement records, the shell vendor trail that Madeline had described. Physical evidence could be moved. Digital evidence was harder, but not impossible if you had the right access. Northstar's server infrastructure, he said. 40 through 42. The main procurement and contract servers are on 41. She paused. Travis has building-level administrative access. He could initiate an emergency data migration as a security protocol, move everything to an external backup system that he controls. Under cover of the building emergency, yes. Cole looked at the stairwell above them. The fourth man from the corridor had gone up. The emergency response was coming in from below. And Travis Kincaid, if Madeline's read was right, and Cole's instincts were aligning with it, was somewhere in the upper floors, with access to the systems that contained everything he needed to make the last 3 years disappear. "We need to go up," Madeline said. "No, we need to get you to the emergency response teams. Cole, if he migrates those servers in the next 20 minutes, there's no audit. There's no case. There's nothing." She looked at him with the specific directness he'd come to understand was how she operated when she'd made a decision. "You saved my life in that elevator. That matters. But it doesn't matter enough if the reason someone tried to kill me in the first place gets away clean." He looked at her. He thought about Lily. He thought about the chicken sandwich on a Thursday and the school bus 2 blocks from the apartment. He thought about the 9 years he'd spent being the person who went toward things instead of away from them, and how exhausted he'd been of that person, and how completely, despite everything, he recognized this moment. "The server room on 41 has a manual isolation protocol," he said. "Physical switch, not software accessible. It's in the secondary access panel behind the main rack housing. If someone initiates an unauthorized data migration, the isolation switch interrupts the external connection." She stared at him. "You know where the isolation switch is. I replaced the access panel's hinge assembly 6 weeks ago." For a moment, she looked like she might say something about that, about all the things he knew about this building, all the things he knew about other things, all the things she still hadn't fully processed about the man she was currently trusting with her life in a stairwell on the 29th floor. She didn't say any of them. She just said, "Then let's go." They took the eastern stairwell up rather than the western route, because the eastern stairwell was designated service access and came out on each floor through a utility passage rather than the main corridor. Cole had used it for equipment transport 3 times in the past year and knew its traffic patterns. Nobody used the eastern stairwell except maintenance staff moving large equipment, and none of the building's security protocols included it as a primary route. It also meant a longer climb. The eastern stairwell topped out at 38, requiring a transfer through a cross corridor to pick up the central maintenance shaft for the final 3 floors to 41. Cole mapped it as they climbed, adjusting for what he knew about where people would funnel in a building emergency versus where they wouldn't. They were at 35 when Cole heard the radio in his pocket, the handset he'd taken from one of the men on 32. He'd left it on but turned down, listening for traffic patterns without transmitting. Crackled once, and through the static he caught a partial voice. "Pierce is secure on 44. He hasn't static. Need another 10 minutes for the full migration. Hold the more static. Vance is still in the building. Find him before." Cole pressed the handset to his ear and turned the volume fractionally higher. "The Admiral is not our problem right now. Focus on." The signal dropped. He stopped on the landing. Madeline stopped behind him. "Pierce," he said. "Admiral Harlan Pierce," she said. Her voice had a different quality now. "He's on the board. He was here for the security demonstration today. He attends the quarterly safety reviews. They said he's secure on 44. They said he's contained on 44. Cole put the radio back in his pocket. "There's a difference." Madeline looked at the stairwell above them. Travis detained a board member. He's eliminating witnesses who could corroborate that the demonstration was compromised from the inside. Cole thought about what the voice on the radio had said. Admiral Harlan Pierce. He ran the name through what he remembered, which was more than he usually let himself acknowledge. He'd had a reason to know that name once, a long time ago, in a different context. Put that aside. It was a distraction he couldn't afford in the next 20 minutes. "We go to 41 first," he said. "If we can isolate the servers, the migration stops regardless of what else happens. Then we find the Admiral. Travis could have him. If Travis has him, Travis needs him alive for leverage. That buys time." He started climbing again. Madeline followed, and for a few flights they moved without talking, just the rhythm of footsteps on concrete and the distant muffled sound of emergency vehicles that had gone from wailing to a lower, stained presence. They were inside the building now. Cole registered, beginning their way up through the floors, which meant the clock had changed. Whatever Travis Kincaid was doing on 41, he knew it too. Cross corridor at 38 was clear. The central maintenance shaft access on 39 was locked, and Cole used his maintenance key and then a second entry bypass that he'd been issued for emergency access and had simply never returned when the access period expired. He'd meant to return it. He hadn't. He was unexpectedly grateful for the administrative oversight. Came out of the maintenance shaft on the 41st floor through the utility room adjacent to the server infrastructure wing. Cole eased the utility room door open 2 inches and looked into the main corridor. One man at the far end, near the server room entrance. Standing still, watching the elevator bank. He had his back mostly to the utility room. Cole pulled the door closed and looked at Madeline. He held up one finger. She nodded. He handed her the radio handset. He didn't have to explain why she understood immediately. She watched him, and when he moved the door open again and stepped out, he keyed the handset once. A single burst of static that was just loud enough to travel down the corridor and make the guard at the far end turn toward the sound. Cole covered 20 feet in the time it took the man to turn and register what he was seeing and begin to formulate a response. He was precise and economical about it, and the man was on the floor before he'd finished formulating. Madeline came out of the utility room. "Clear," she said. "Clear." The server room door required an executive keycard, which Cole didn't have. He looked at the panel for 3 seconds, then pulled the access cover off the card reader housing, a trick he'd used twice before when executives had locked themselves out and couldn't wait for security to arrive with a MasterCard, and shorted the access circuit with a piece of wire from his bag. The lock clicked open. "That's not in the maintenance manual," Madeline said. "No," he agreed, and pushed the door open. The server room was cold and loud, the white noise of cooling systems running at capacity, the blinking status lights of a dozen active rack units, the particular ozone smell of high-volume data systems working hard. It was also not empty. A technician Cole didn't recognize was at the main console at the far end, running a data migration sequence. Progress bar on his screen showed 37% complete. Turned when the door opened, and his expression went through surprise, and then something harder in the space of a breath. Cole moved toward him. What happened next was untidy in a way that Cole couldn't entirely control. The technician was not trained the way the men in the corridor had been trained, but he had the advantage of desperation and a wheeled equipment cart that he put between himself and Cole with more effectiveness than Cole anticipated. Cole went around it, and the technician went over it and knocked 2 rack-mounted drives out of their housings in the process. Progress bar hit 41%. Cole reached the console and killed the migration sequence. The technician tried to restart it from a secondary terminal across the room, and Madeline stepped in front of that terminal and put her hand flat on the keyboard and looked at the man with an expression that Cole had not previously seen on her face, something past professional authority, something with actual anger in it. "Don't," she said. He looked at her and looked at Cole, who was between him and the door, and sat down on the floor. Cole checked the migration log. 41% of the procurement database had been transferred to an external server address before the sequence terminated. He checked the destination address, an unfamiliar string that would take forensic work to unravel. He copied it to the radio handset's memory function, which had a note recording feature that most people didn't know about. He needed to lock the isolation switch to prevent any further attempts at migration. He went to the secondary access panel behind the main rack housing, the one whose hinge assembly he'd replaced 6 weeks ago. He found the manual isolation switch exactly where he knew it would be and threw it. The external network connection light on the main consoles went from green to red. "It's isolated," he said. Madeline exhaled. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The server room hummed around them. The technician on the floor looked at his hands. Then the radio in Cole's pocket crackled again, and through the static came a voice that stopped him in a way nothing else in the past 2 hours had. It wasn't Travis. It wasn't one of the men from the corridors. It was older, controlled. A voice that carried the particular quality of someone who had spent decades giving orders in situations where getting the tone wrong cost lives. "If anyone is receiving this transmission, this is Admiral Harlan Pierce. I am being held on the 44th floor, Northeast Conference Room. I have information relevant to an active federal investigation into classified systems procurement fraud. I am transmitting on the maintenance frequency because the standard channels appear to be compromised. If there is anyone capable of receiving and acting on this, please respond." Cole held the handset. Madeline was looking at him. She could see something in his face that she didn't have context for yet. "You know him," she said. Cole turned the handset over in his hands. "I knew of him. A long time ago." "How long ago?" "Before maintenance work." He looked at the door, then at the isolation switch, then at the technician on the floor, and made the only decision the situation allowed. Keyed the radio. Admiral Pierce. This is Cole Vance. I'm on 41. I'm reading you. A pause. Static. Then, Vance. Another pause. Something in the way the man said the single word recognition, but layered with something else that Cole couldn't parse through a radio signal and 40 feet of concrete. I wondered if you were still in the building. I need your position and the number of personnel in your location. Northeast Conference Room 44. 2 men with me. 1 armed, 1 covering the door. A beat. Vance, I need you to know something before you come up here. You can tell me when I get there. No, the voice was firm. Not commanding something more personal than that. I need to tell you now. Because if something goes wrong in the next few minutes, you need to know it before any of the rest of it happens. A pause. I know who you are. I know what your final mission was. And I've known for 6 years what happened to your team. The server room was very cold and very loud, and Cole stood in the middle of it holding a radio handset, and somewhere in the building below him, he could hear emergency response teams working their way up through the floors, and he did not speak. It wasn't your route that was leaked, Admiral Pierce said. It was the communications protocol. Someone on the operational support side sold it to a third party 3 weeks before your mission. Your team's position was compromised before you ever went in. A pause. It wasn't your fault, Vance. It was never your fault. And the man who sold that protocol, I'm looking at evidence right now in this room that connects him to Northstar's procurement fraud. He's been operational this whole time. Cole looked at Madeline, who was watching him with an expression that had gone careful and still. He thought about 2 men he'd carried in his memory for 9 years. He thought about the specific weight of something you've believed about yourself for so long that you've stopped examining whether it's actually true. He keyed the handset. I'm on my way up, he said. He set the radio in his pocket, looked at Madeline, and said, we need to secure this technician and get moving. She looked at him for a moment, the careful, still expression holding, and then she nodded. I heard what he said, she told him quietly. I know. Cole, later. He said it without hardness. Just the flat edge of a man who knew what happened when you let something open inside you before the work was finished. Right now I need to get to 44. She didn't push it. She helped him secure the technician with cable management straps from the server room supply cabinet. Not comfortable, not permanent, but sufficient, and she stayed close behind him as he opened the server room door and stepped back into the corridor. 2 floors above them, a man who had been running from something for years was waiting in a room with information that could either rewrite the past or be destroyed before it ever reached daylight. Cole took the stairs. The 43rd floor was where everything changed pace. They came out of the stairwell into a maintenance access corridor, and Cole immediately registered that the building's character had shifted. The emergency response teams were close enough now that their presence was affecting how the upper floors felt. Movement that should have been confident was becoming compressed, rushed, the way activity changes when people know time is running short, which meant Travis Kincaid knew it too. Cole moved through the maintenance corridor with Madeline behind him and came to the access point for the 44th floor's utility passage. He opened it carefully, looked into the passage beyond. Clear, they moved through. The Northeast Conference Room on 44 was accessible through a door at the end of the executive corridor, and the executive corridor was not the place to be open, visible, no cover. Cole took the long route through the utility passage instead, which added 4 minutes, but kept them out of anyone's sightline. He heard the men before he reached the conference room. 2 voices, neither of them the admiral's. One was giving short, clipped instructions. The other was asking questions in the specific anxious pattern of someone whose plan was degrading faster than they'd prepared for. Cole stopped outside the utility door that connected to the conference room's secondary access, a door that existed, because the conference room had originally been designed with a private attendance anteroom, and nobody had bricked it up when Northstar redesigned the floor. Cole had found the door while replacing a ventilation diffuser 18 months ago. He'd noted it in his maintenance log under the category of interesting structural features that nobody else knew were there. He looked at Madeline. She held up the radio handset she'd been holding it since he'd given it to her in the server room. She understood what he was asking. If he went through the door and it went wrong, she needed to be transmitting their location to whoever was listening on the maintenance frequency. She nodded. Cole opened the utility door. The anteroom beyond was small 8 feet by 8 feet, with a second door leading to the conference room proper. Through the gap under that door, he could see light and hear voices clearly now. The extraction window is closing. The voice was Travis Kincaid's. Cole had heard it for 8 hours over the course of the morning demonstration, and he placed it instantly. We're not going to have another opportunity once the federal response gets to this floor. What about the Admiral? He stays in the room. We go out through the northeast stairwell and meet the vehicle at the parking structure. A pause. Vance is still unaccounted for. The teams on 31 didn't report in. A longer pause. Vance isn't maintenance. Travis's voice had something new in it, a shift from operational authority to something personal. He was never maintenance. And if he's still in this building, that's a problem we cannot leave behind us. Cole pushed the anteroom door open and stepped into the conference room. It was a large room-long table, 15 chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows along the east wall that showed the city below, which on another day and in another context would have been a very good view. Admiral Harlan Pierce was seated at the far end of the table. He was in his mid-60s, white-haired, with the build of a man who had been physically capable for most of his life and was still carrying most of it. His wrists were secured to the chair arms with cable ties, and there was dried blood at his temple from something that had happened earlier. But he was upright and his eyes were clear. 2 men flanked him. One had his weapon out. The other, near the door, turned toward Cole as he came through the anteroom entrance. Travis Kincaid was at the conference table's near end, and he turned last, and what Cole saw in his face was a rapid sequence surprise, recognition, and then the specific quality of a man who has anticipated a confrontation and has prepared something for it. "Cole Vance," Travis said. "I was wondering when you'd come up." Cole took in the room's geometry in the time it took Travis to say his name. 2 armed men in calculated positions. Admiral Pierce secured at the far end. Windows on the east wall. 2 doors the anteroom he'd come through, and the main conference room entrance that Travis was positioned near. "It's over, Travis," Cole said. Travis tilted his head slightly. "Is it?" "The server migration is 41% complete. The balance of the procurement records are in an external system. The federal investigators are going to find a very incomplete picture. The migration was terminated. The servers are isolated." Cole kept his voice even. "And the destination address was logged." Something moved in Travis's expression. Not panic, the man had too much control for panic, but a recalculation. A visible narrowing. "You were in the server room," Travis said. "Yes." "How did you?" Travis stopped himself. Looked at Cole the way he should have looked at him 7 hours earlier, when Cole was just the maintenance worker standing in the corridor with a work order. "Who are you?" "You already know," Cole said. "You've been using the same technology in this building that showed up in a compromised communications protocol 9 years ago. The kind of technology that doesn't come from a civilian contractor. I recognized it in the ventilation device on 36. Travis was quiet for a moment. "Then you were SEAL Team 7. "Team 6, Cole said, but close enough. The armed man to the right of Admiral Pierce shifted his weight, and Cole tracked it without looking directly at him. The other man near the door hadn't moved, which meant he was waiting for a signal rather than working on his own judgment. Travis looked at Cole with something that was almost curiosity. "You should have stayed in the elevator shaft. You would have been the accident. The maintenance worker who tried to be a hero and didn't make it. That plan didn't work out, no." Travis looked at the table, then back at Cole. He had the flat, calculating quality of a man running options. "I have 2 armed men, Vance. You have a tool bag. I know. So tell me how this ends well for you." Cole looked at Admiral Pierce, who was watching him with an expression he recognized the look of an old military man, who has assessed a situation and reached a conclusion and is waiting to see if the person he's assessed agrees with him. "Admiral," Cole said, "can you move your chair?" Pierce looked at his secured wrists, looked at the chair, and without a word began rocking his weight from side to side with the careful, methodical quality of a man who has decided he is going to do a thing and is simply working out the mechanics. Travis said, "Stop." Cole was already moving. What happened in the next 30 seconds was not precise, and it was not controlled, and it was not the kind of thing that gets described accurately afterward, because the people involved are not in a state to observe it accurately while it's happening. Cole went for the armed man on the right first, because that was the active threat. The man near the door reacted, but he reacted to the movement rather than anticipating it, and reaction is slower than initiation. The Admiral got his chair moving at some point, During it, Cole registered the crash of it going over without having the bandwidth to track what happened after that. Travis went for the main conference room door. Cole let the second man down onto the carpet and turned, and Travis was at the door with his hand on the handle, and Cole covered the distance between them in the time it took Travis to pull the handle and find that the door was locked. It locked automatically from the inside when the security system went into emergency mode, which Travis had presumably done and had presumably planned to override with his administrative keycard, which was no longer in his jacket pocket because Cole had taken it when they'd closed the distance. Travis turned. His face had finally arrived at something that wasn't composed. Cole held up the keycard. "You took that during..." Travis stopped. "You were focused on the door," Cole said. In the silence that followed, Admiral Pierce, who had gotten himself and the chair partially uprighted against the conference table, said in the dry, commanding voice of a man who had been waiting for the appropriate moment, "Vance, the door, if you don't mind." Cole used the keycard to unlock the conference room's main entrance. The first emergency response officers came through it 40 seconds later, and behind them, looking like a woman who had walked through a day she intended to fully account for once she had a moment to breathe, was Madeline Prescott. She looked at Cole. She looked at Travis Kincaid, standing with his back against the window and nowhere to go. She looked at Admiral Pierce, who was bleeding from his temple and had a broken chair arm attached to his wrist and was carrying himself with the bearing of a man who considers bleeding and broken furniture minor inconveniences. She looked back at Cole. "The fourth man," she said, "from the corridor on 31. He went up. I know. Response teams will have him, and the server migration is stopped. 41% transferred. The destination address is logged in the radio handset. Forensic recovery should be possible." She absorbed that. She looked at Travis again, and what was in her face was not satisfaction, and it was not relief. It was something more complicated, the expression of someone who had trusted a person in a position of authority and discovered that the trust had been a liability, and was now doing the accounting of what that cost. Travis looked at her. "He didn't say anything, Travis," she said. Her voice was steady and quiet and had no performance in it. "You had a job, you had my trust, and you used both of them to try to kill me." She paused. "I want you to understand that I'm going to be present at every single hearing." Travis looked away from her. That was the only response he gave. The emergency response officers moved into the room, and Cole stepped back and let them work. And after a moment, he sat down in one of the conference room chairs because his left arm, the one that had taken the hit in the door frame on 31, was aching in a way he'd been not thinking about for the past 40 minutes, and he was tired in the specific deep way that came after adrenaline finished doing its job. Admiral Pierce was being attended to by the response team's medical unit. He looked across the room at Cole and held his gaze for a moment, and Cole held it back. There were things between them that would need to be said in a different room and a different time. Things that had been sitting in a specific part of Cole's memory for 9 years, sealed away because opening them was not compatible with packing a lunch bag and walking a child to a school bus and showing up to repair elevator fault codes at 7:56 in the morning. The Admiral nodded once. Cole nodded back. Madeline came and sat down in the chair next to him, not across the room, not at a professional distance, but the chair directly beside him, close enough that when she exhaled it was audible. "Are you hurt?" she said. "Left arm. It's bruised, not broken." "How do you know?" "Range of motion's intact." He demonstrated, which pulled something in the muscle, and he didn't let it show on his face. She watched him not let it show. "You should let the paramedics look at it. In a minute." "Cole," he looked at her. She was close enough that he could see that her composure was intact but expensive, the specific quality of someone who has held it together for a sustained period and is beginning to calculate how much it has cost. "Thank you," she said. "Not the polished version. The flat, direct version that didn't dress itself up." He nodded. Outside the conference room windows, the city was continuing its business in the ordinary way of a city that doesn't know what's happened in the buildings above its streets. In a school somewhere 2 miles from here, an 8-year-old girl with a chicken sandwich in her lunch bag was probably finishing her morning classes, unaware that her father had spent the last 2 hours in a building that someone had tried to turn into a trap. Cole thought about the school bus stop. He thought about the particular way Lily said his name when she came through the front door in the afternoon. Half announcement, half complaint about whatever had happened that day, completely certain he would be there. He was going to be there today, too. That wasn't nothing. In fact, sitting in a conference room on the 44th floor of a building where a great deal had just gone wrong, with a bruised arm and a tool bag at his feet, and the sound of emergency protocols being executed all around him. Cole Vance thought it might be the most important thing he'd managed to hold on to through all of it. The paramedics looked at Cole's arm in the corridor outside the conference room, while the federal response teams worked inside. The lead paramedic, a woman in her 30s, with the efficient, no-commentary manner of someone who had seen too many people minimize injuries they shouldn't, pressed 2 fingers along the forearm and watched his face. "You said bruised," she said. "It feels bruised. It feels bruised because you've been running on adrenaline for 2 hours and your pain calibration is off." She pressed again, higher, near the elbow. "That's a partial tear in the extensor muscle. Not broken. You were right about that. But you need imaging and you need to stop using it as if it's fine." "I'll get imaging. Today, yes." She wrapped it, not a full immobilization, just compression support, and gave him a look that communicated she didn't entirely believe the yes, but had done what she could. He thanked her, and she moved on to the next person, and Cole sat in the corridor with his back against the wall, and his wrapped arm resting on his knee, and let himself be still for the first time since 8:53 that morning. It was now past noon. His phone had recovered signal when the jamming equipment was located, and disabled 1 unit on 38, another on 43, a third in the main communications hub on 46 that had been the source of the building-wide interference. Federal communications technicians had found all 3 within 40 minutes of arrival. Cole had watched them work from a distance and noted how they'd done it, filing that information away in the part of his brain that still cataloged things he hoped he'd never need. His phone showed 6 missed calls from the school, 2 from an unknown number, and 1 from a contact listed as Doug, his supervisor that had come in at 9:42, and whose voicemail he hadn't listened to yet. He called the school first. The administrative coordinator answered on the second ring, and her relief was audible. "Mr. Vance, we've been trying to reach you. There was a news alert about an incident at Northstar Aeronautics." "I'm fine. I'm still in the building, but I'm fine." "Is Lily okay?" "She's fine. She doesn't know anything's happened. She's in class." A pause. "Do you need us to? Is there someone who can pick her up?" He thought about that. His neighbor, Ellen Marsh, had a key and had picked Lily up before during the occasional work emergency. Lily liked her and tolerated the pickup with the resigned dignity of an 8-year-old who understood that sometimes adults had complicated days. "I'll call Mrs. Marsh. Can you leave a note with the front desk that she may be picking up today?" "Of course." He hung up and called Ellen Marsh, who answered immediately and said yes before he'd finished explaining, which was the particular grace of someone who understood that he wouldn't ask unless he needed to. He thanked her twice, and she told him to stop thanking her and to eat something. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment after the call ended. Corridor hummed around him, federal agents, building security personnel who were now fully operationally compromised and being interviewed in small groups, paramedics, and a man in a gray suit who had arrived 40 minutes ago and identified himself as a Department of Justice investigative coordinator, and who had been conducting very quiet, very purposeful conversations with people in corners ever since. Cole had already spoken to him once, briefly, at the federal agent's request rather than his own. He'd given a factual account of what he'd seen and done, in the order he'd seen and done it, without elaboration. The man in the gray suit had listened and taken notes and asked 3 follow-up questions, and then said they'd need a full formal statement, and Cole had said he understood. He was putting his phone away when Madeline came out of the conference room. She'd been in there for 40 minutes with the federal coordinators, and it showed not in a collapsed way, but in the specific visible cost of sustained high-stakes conversation, the particular flatness that settles into a person's face when they've been operating at full capacity for too long. She saw Cole in the corridor and came toward him, and when she sat down against the wall beside him, it was with the specific lack of ceremony of someone who has run out of performance energy and is functioning on the underlying material. "They have enough," she said. "Between what was on the servers before the migration, what the forensic team can recover from the 41% that transferred, and the documentation Admiral Pierce had collected in the conference room." She stopped. Travis had been doing this for 4 years. Defense contract procurement routed through 3 shell companies. Classified systems specifications sold to 2 foreign intermediaries. She looked at the wall across the corridor. The technology and the ventilation device. The communications protocol from 9 years ago. Was Travis the source? He was the facilitator. He connected a Northstar engineering contractor to the buyers. The contractor had access to the SEAL operational communication specifications. She turned to look at Cole. Protocol that compromised your team's mission. Cole said nothing. He's been doing it that long, she said. 9 years. Travis Kincaid has been inside legitimate security organizations for 9 years, and the whole time, she stopped herself. He could see her pulling back from something. What? He said. I hired him, she said. I didn't hire him personally. He was already in the security director position when I took over the company, but I retained him. I reviewed his file, I read the recommendations, I sat across from him in quarterly reviews, and I thought, she exhaled. I thought he was good at his job. He was good at his job, Cole said. That was the problem. The things that made him effective at security were the same things that made him effective at what he was doing on the side. You can't always tell the difference from the outside. She looked at him. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, it's just accurate. She made a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You're not very comforting. You don't need comfort right now. You need to eat something and then sleep for about 10 hours. In that order? Doesn't matter much. She rested her head back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. Cole sat beside her and watched the federal operation continue down the corridor, and neither of them spoke for a minute, which was the most comfortable silence he'd been in for longer than he could immediately account for. The Admiral wants to talk to you, she said. I know. He's being checked out by the medical team. They want to take him to the hospital for the head injury, but he's arguing with them. That sounds right. She turned her head to look at him without lifting it from the wall. He said something to you on the radio. Before you came up to 44. Yes. About your team. About what happened on your last mission. Cole looked at the corridor. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. You've been carrying that for 9 years. He didn't confirm or deny it. He didn't have to. She'd read it correctly, and they both knew it, and the confirmation was unnecessary. Is it different now? She said, knowing what he told you. He considered that honestly, the way the question deserved. Ask me in a week, he said. Right now it's too close to feel like anything except information. She nodded. That seemed to satisfy something. She looked back at the ceiling. I want to offer you a different job, she said. I know. She turned her head again. I haven't said what it is. You're going to offer me something in corporate security. Probably a senior position. Chief Security Officer, she said. The position is open for fairly obvious reasons. No, he said. A pause. You haven't heard the full offer. I don't need to. I'm not the right person for that job. Cole. I know what I did today. It doesn't mean I'm the right person to run a security organization. He looked at her. I'm not good at organizational structure. I'm not good at managing teams in normal operational conditions. I'm good at specific things that matter in specific situations, and the rest of the time I'm a maintenance worker who reads building specifications and knows where the isolation switches are. He paused. That's not false modesty. It's just accurate. She studied him for a moment. You say that word a lot. What word? Accurate. When you're telling me something you think I might not want to hear. He hadn't noticed that. He thought about it. Probably true. It's interesting. She sat up from the wall, straightening, and something shifted back into her posture, not the full professional bearing, but some version of it. I'm not going to stop making the offer just because you declined once. That's your prerogative. It is. She stood and looked down at him in the corridor. Your arm. I'm getting imaging today. Good. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out a business card, not the standard Northstar card, but a smaller one with just a number on it. She held it out. He took it. When you're ready to talk about the other thing, she said. Not a job offer. Just the other thing. He looked at the card. He put it in his shirt pocket. He spoke to Admiral Pierce in a small room that the federal coordinators had designated as an interview staging area, a neutral, characterless room with a table and 4 chairs and a window that faced the interior of the building rather than outside, which gave it a sealed, private quality that seemed appropriate. Pierce had a bandage at his temple and was moving more carefully than he'd been moving in the conference room. The adrenaline of the situation having subsided, and the actual physical cost of the day beginning to make itself known, which Cole recognized because he was experiencing something similar in his arm. They sat across the table from each other, and the federal coordinator had stepped out to give them what he'd called a few minutes, which Cole understood to mean he was listening from outside the door and would give them exactly as long as it took for the conversation to become relevant to his investigation. Pierce looked at Cole across the table. In the smaller, more contained light of the room, he looked older than he'd seemed in the conference room, not decrepit, but the age was showing in a way that authority could mask in a larger space. "I've wanted to have this conversation for 6 years," Pierce said. "What stopped you?" Cole said. "I didn't have the evidence to go with it. Telling a man his team's deaths weren't his fault without being able to prove the alternative doesn't help him. It just gives him a different kind of doubt to carry. That was fair." Cole acknowledged it with a nod. "The communications protocol breach," Pierce said. "I identified it approximately 18 months after your mission. There was an internal review of contractor access to SEAL operational specifications unrelated to your case. Something else had surfaced. During that review, a pattern emerged that I couldn't make fully public without compromising other active investigations." He leaned his forearms on the table. "The contractor who sold the specifications had connections to a shell company. That shell company had connections to a Northstar supplier. I've been following that chain for 6 years, and Travis was at the end of it. Travis was the bridge. He wasn't the original sale, he came in later, when the initial contractor was trying to clean up his exposure. Travis helped him do it, and in exchange got access to the network." Pierce looked at the table. "I joined Northstar's board partly because of this. I needed proximity." Cole looked at him. "You've been investigating this from inside the board for how long?" 3 years. A pause. "I want to be clear that I had no knowledge of what Travis was planning for today." "If I had, I believe you," Cole said. Pierce was quiet for a moment. He seemed to be organizing something, the way a person does when they've had a long time to rehearse something, and have now arrived at the moment and discovered the rehearsal didn't quite prepare them. "I read your service record after your team's mission," he said. "The full record, not the summary. You were an exceptional operator, Vance. What happened on that mission would have happened regardless of who was leading the team, because the compromise was at the communications level before anyone went in. I want to be absolutely clear about that." Cole looked at the window. It showed the building's interior HVAC ducting through the glass, mechanical, functional, indifferent. "I know what guilt does to a person," Pierce said. "I've watched it for 40 years. I've seen men carry things that weren't theirs to carry, and I've seen what it costs them." He paused. "What did it cost you?" Cole looked back at him. It was a question nobody had asked in that specific form before, and it required an honest answer. "About 4 years of being present," he said. "Maybe 5. After my wife died, it was both things at once, and I spent a long time not being entirely there, even when I was in the room. And now? Better." He thought about Lily. "Mostly better." Pierce nodded. He looked at Cole with the particular expression of a man who has done what he could and knows it is not adequate to the size of the thing and is making peace with that. "Your teammates," he said. "Danny Reeves and Marcus Obi. They deserve to have the record corrected. Their families deserve to know what actually happened." Cole had not let himself say their names in a while. Hearing them in someone else's voice had a specific effect that he absorbed without showing it. "Yes," he said. "That will be part of the federal disclosure when the investigation concludes. It won't be public classified mission parameters, but their sex files will be corrected, and their families will be informed through appropriate channels." Pierce paused. "I wanted you to know that before it happens rather than after." Cole sat with that for a moment. Outside the door, he could hear the low movement of the corridor, the ongoing process of the day being officially documented and contained. "Thank you," Cole said. He said it the way he said other things without performance, without dressing it up. Pierce seemed to understand that and accept it in the same spirit. They sat quietly for a moment. Then Pierce said, with a shift in register that moved the conversation into different territory, "Madeline is going to try to give you a job." "She already did. What did you say?" "No." Pierce looked at him steadily. "She's going to ask again." "I know. She's not wrong that you'd be good at it." "She's not wrong that I'd be good at certain parts of it," Cole said. "The parts she saw today. The rest of it is management and budgeting and organizational politics, and I spent 9 years getting away from structures that required me to operate inside someone else's framework." Pierce was quiet for a moment. "And the real answer?" Cole looked at him. "My daughter is 8 years old. She's going to be 8 years old for 11 more months, and then she'll be 9, and then she'll be 10, and she doesn't have a mother. She has me, and if I take a job that puts me back inside the kind of work that today represents." He stopped. "You're afraid you won't come home," Pierce said. "I'm afraid I'll come home, but I'll be somewhere else," Cole said. "That's worse." Pierce looked at him for a long time. Something in his expression shifted not into sentiment, which wasn't Pierce's register, but into the specific acknowledgement of a man who has spent his life inside institutions and understands, with precision, the cost of that choice. Fair, Pierce said. Cole left the building at 4:17 in the afternoon. He walked through the lobby, which had been transformed into a federal staging area, all marble floors and temporary equipment tables and personnel, moving with the particular purposeful energy of an investigation in its opening hours and through the glass doors and onto the street, and the afternoon hit him with the ordinary quality of a city that had been doing its business all day, regardless of what had happened 46 floors up. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. His arm ached under the compression wrap. He was hungry in the specific hollow way that came after a long stretch of not eating, and he was tired in a way that went deeper than sleep would fix all at once. He called Ellen Marsh. "She's fine," Ellen said before he could ask. "We're making grilled cheese. She told me about a boy in her class who she describes as generally annoying, and I've been getting updates on his behavior for the past 40 minutes. Cole exhaled. "I'll be there in an hour. Take your time. We have grilled cheese." He drove to the imaging center. He kept his word about that, even though the arm felt the same as it had when the paramedic wrapped it, which he knew meant nothing, and waited 40 minutes and had the scan done, and was told by the radiologist that it was a partial tear, 4 to 6 weeks of reduced use, follow up with his regular doctor. He thanked the radiologist, scheduled the follow-up on his phone from the parking lot, and drove to Ellen Marsh's apartment. Lily was at the kitchen table with a grilled cheese half-eaten, and a drawing she'd made of what appeared to be a horse with an unusually long neck. She looked up when he came in and registered his presence with the particular 8-year-old inventory of a person checking that everything was accounted for. "You're late," she said. "I know. Mrs. Marsh made grilled cheese. I heard. Why is your arm like that?" She was looking at the compression wrap. "I heard it at work. It's fine." She processed that. "Does it hurt?" "A little." "How little?" "Not enough to worry about." She seemed to weigh this against what she knew about his scale for these things, which she had developed through observation over several years. She appeared to accept it. Mrs. Marsh said I could have a second grilled cheese if I finished my homework first. "Did you finish your homework?" "Almost." He sat down at the table across from her. Ellen brought him a plate without asking grilled cheese and sliced apple, and he ate it and listened to Lily explain the situation with the generally annoying boy in her class, whose name was apparently Owen, and whose primary offense was taking the best-colored pencils during art time without asking, and Cole listened to all of it and made the appropriate response, and felt, by degrees, the day releasing its grip on him. Not completely. It would take time for it to fully settle into the past, and some of it wouldn't settle completely. He knew that about himself. But this, the kitchen table, the grilled cheese, Lily explaining Owen's colored pencil crimes with the gravity of a prosecutor making an opening statement, this was real in a way that everything else was struggling to match. He drove Lily home at 6:30. She fell asleep in the back seat 3 blocks from their apartment, which happened sometimes when she'd had a busy day, and he carried her up the stairs and got her into bed with her shoes off, and her drawing which she'd brought with her on the nightstand where she'd be able to see it in the morning. He sat at the kitchen table afterward with a glass of water and his phone and the quiet of an apartment where an 8-year-old was asleep. He thought about Danny Reeves and Marcus Obi. He thought about the specific weight of something he'd been carrying for 9 years, and what it felt like now that the explanation had been delivered. And the answer was that it felt the same as it had this morning almost. There was a difference. It was small, and it was not going to arrive fully formed, and it was not going to fix anything that the weight had cost him. But it was different. He opened his phone and found the missed call from the unknown number. He listened to the voicemail. It was Travis Kincaid's attorney. A recorded message informing him that he may be contacted as part of the federal proceedings and that he should secure his own legal representation if necessary. Boilerplate. He deleted it. Then he looked at the business card from Madeline Prescott, the one with just the number. He turned it over in his hand, put it on the kitchen counter. The next several weeks moved with the particular quality of an aftermath, not dramatic, not resolved, but processing in the way that large things process, which is slowly and with reversals and at a pace that bears no relationship to how fast the original events moved. The federal investigation into Travis Kincaid's operation opened officially within 48 hours of the incident. Cole gave a full formal statement over 2 sessions with the DOJ investigative coordinator, the man in the gray suit, whose name was Rourke, and answered every question with the same factual directness he'd applied to everything else. Rourke was good at his job, Cole thought. He asked the same questions multiple ways without making it obvious he was doing it, which was a technique designed to identify inconsistencies, and he seemed mildly frustrated by the absence of any. Cole was interviewed separately about his background, not by Rourke, but by two federal agents, who were coordinating with military intelligence on the SEAL mission connection. That conversation was shorter and more guarded on both sides, and Cole understood that the full disclosure Pierce had promised about Danny and Marcus would take time to move through the appropriate channels, and he was prepared for that. The machinery of official acknowledgement moved at its own speed and couldn't be pushed. Northstar Aeronautics was a company in crisis, in a way that its PR team was visibly working very hard to characterize as a company in transformation. Madeline gave a statement to the press within 24 hours, direct, specific, without the defensive corporate language that usually showed up in these situations. She named the failures, named the things that would change, and did not characterize the events as anyone else's fault but the company's, which was a specific kind of institutional courage that most organizations never managed and some actively avoided. Cole watched the statement on the news in his kitchen while Lily ate cereal and expressed her opinion that news was boring. He called the number on the card 3 days after the incident. Madeline answered on the second ring, which told him she'd logged the number. "I'm not accepting the chief security officer position," he said. "I know. I didn't think you were calling about that. I wanted to know how you were doing." A pause. "That's a complicated question right now." "I figured. I'm asking anyway." He heard something shift in the quality of the connection, not the signal, the mood. "I'm sleeping better than I expected to," she said. "I went into the office yesterday. Everyone treated me like I was made of something fragile, which is annoying isn't the right word. It's just incorrect. You're not fragile. No. But it's hard to convince people of that when they watched you nearly die in an elevator 3 days ago." A pause. "How's your arm?" "Improving. The follow-up appointment is Friday." "Good." Another pause, longer. "Cole, I meant what I said about the other thing." "I know. I'm not asking for an answer. I wanted to say it clearly, outside of a building where someone was trying to kill me." He looked at the kitchen counter, where the business card was still sitting. "I appreciated that you said it. But, no but. I just need time to figure out what the shape of things is." That's a very careful way to say something. "I'm a careful person." He could hear her almost law, the short exhale that wasn't quite a laugh but was in the same family. "You ran toward a falling elevator," she said. "I've been revising my definition of careful where you're concerned." Running toward the elevator was careful, he said. The alternative was letting it hit the buffer, and the buffer was overdue for inspection. "Is that really how you thought about it?" He considered being honest versus being easier to understand. "Mostly," he said. She seemed to accept that. They talked for another few minutes, not about the investigation, not about the job, not about Travis or the Admiral or the server room. She told him that Northstar's board had voted unanimously the previous evening to establish a memorial fund for service personnel whose classified technology specifications had been compromised through the procurement fraud. The fund would operate through a veterans advocacy organization and would support families of personnel killed in related operations. Cole held the phone and didn't speak for a moment. "I wanted you to know that directly," she said, before it was announced publicly. "Thank you," he said. After the call, he sat at the kitchen counter. Lily was at school. The apartment was quiet. The business card was on the counter in front of him, and the compression wrap was still on his arm, and outside the window, the city was moving at its ordinary speed. He thought about what it meant to put something down that you'd been carrying for a long time. Not resolved things that size didn't resolve cleanly, but set down. The weight relocated from inside to alongside, where you could see it and name it and stop letting it make decisions in the dark. He thought about Danny Reeves, who had been from Ohio and had a laugh that arrived before the joke did. He thought about Marcus Obey, who had been the most methodical person Cole had ever operated alongside, and who had been right, more often than not, about the things he was methodical about. He thought about them as people, rather than as a guilt he'd stored in the part of himself he'd sealed off. And for the first time in 9 years, the thinking didn't require effort to contain. He picked up the business card. He didn't call again. He just held it. In the quiet kitchen, with the cities outside and his daughter at school and his arm aching at a manageable level, and let himself sit with the ordinary quality of a life that was, on balance, still intact. his phone buzzed. A text from Doug Merritt, his supervisor, that said, "Fault code on elevator 3, building B. You available tomorrow morning?" Cole looked at the text. He thought about elevator maintenance, about fault codes and sensor calibration, and the specific satisfaction of knowing how something worked and being able to make it work correctly again. He typed back, "Yes, 7:50. He put his phone down and went to the window. The afternoon was moving toward evening. In a few hours, he'd pick up Lily from the bus stop, and she'd tell him about Owen and the colored pencils, or something else that had taken precedence in the architecture of her day, and he'd listen to all of it. Tomorrow morning, he'd be at Building B at 7:50, fixing an elevator. That was when he looked at it squarely, not a small life. It was just a life that had stopped trying to be more than what it was. And there was a specific kind of peace in that, not perfect, not permanent, but real in the way that the grilled cheese and the homework and the generally annoying boy named Owen were real. He was still standing at the window when his phone buzzed again. This time, it was the school. Not an emergency notification, the regular afternoon reminder that early pickup requests needed to be submitted by 3 o'clock. He had 40 minutes. He got his jacket and his keys. The federal investigation into Travis Kincaid's operation took 11 months to reach its first public milestone. Cole followed it the way he followed most things that existed at the edge of his life, not obsessively, not with the specific hunger of someone who needed the outcome for their own resolution, but steadily, the way you watch weather moving toward you from a distance and make reasonable preparations without rearranging your entire day around it. He read the court filings when they became public. He tracked the names as they surfaced, the shell companies, the intermediary contractors, the foreign buyers who had paid for classified systems specifications and gotten what they paid for. He noted the dates and the amounts and the scale of what had been running quietly behind the surface of legitimate defense contracting for nearly a decade. It was larger than Northstar. That became clear within the first 3 months. Travis Kincaid had been one node in a network that connected 6 defense contractors, 2 private intelligence firms, and a brokerage operation that had been functioning since before Cole had joined the Navy. Procurement fraud was the visible layer. Underneath it was something older and more deliberate, a systematic harvesting of classified operational specifications that had been sold to multiple buyers over multiple years, and the people who had bought them had not bought them for academic interest. Cole absorbed all of this in pieces, at kitchen tables and on lunch breaks, and occasionally in the parking lot of Lily's school, while he waited for the dismissal bell. He absorbed it without letting it take up more space than it deserved. What it deserved was significant, but finite. That was the distinction he'd had to work out for himself. Slowly, over the months following the day, at Northstar, the difference between something being important and something being allowed to occupy every available room inside you. He'd been working on that distinction for 9 years without knowing what to call it. Now he had the words for it. The compression wrap came off his arm 6 weeks after the incident, as the radiologist had projected. The partial tear healed without surgery he'd done. The prescribed exercises, with the discipline of someone who knew how bodies worked and what happened when you took shortcuts on recovery. And by week 8, he had full range of motion with residual stiffness in cold weather that the physical therapist said would probably be permanent. He went back to full duty at Northstar. That decision surprised some people. His supervisor Doug had assumed, in the vague way of someone who doesn't ask direct questions, that Cole would either leave the company voluntarily or be absorbed into whatever security restructuring was happening at the executive level. When Cole showed up at 7:50 on a Monday 6 weeks after the incident with his tool bag and a work order for a malfunctioning HVAC sensor on the 28th floor, Doug had looked at him with the specific expression of a man recalibrating expectations. "You're back," Doug said. "I took the time the doctor recommended," Cole said. "Work order says the HVAC sensor has been throwing the same fault code for a week." "It has. I'll get it done." Doug watched him walk toward the service elevator and seemed to decide that asking further questions was unlikely to produce more information than he already had. The building felt different. That was the honest assessment, and Cole made it without drama. The 46th floor had been closed for renovation. The executive suite was being redesigned with new security architecture, a project that was expected to take 4 months and that Cole had no involvement in. The elevator banks had been fully replaced. New equipment, new backup systems, newly certified brake assemblies that he had personally personally inspected when they were installed because the maintenance work order had come through his department and he'd requested the assignment. He'd stood in the elevator shaft during the installation and watched the certified technicians mount the new brake assembly and had said nothing because everything was correct and correct work didn't require comment. The building's security staff had been entirely replaced. The new security director was a woman named Patricia Chen, who had come from Federal Protective Services and who had a reputation for institutional thoroughness that was apparently not always comfortable to work alongside. She'd introduced herself to Cole in his second week back, in the kind of direct, business-only way that suggested she'd read his incident report and had formed views about what it contained. "I want to understand the maintenance access points," she'd said. "All of them. The ones on the schematic and the ones that aren't." "Good place to start," he said. "I'd like to do a walkthrough with you, when you have time." "I have time Friday afternoon." Done the walkthrough. Cole had shown her everything: the service shafts, the utility corridors, the decommissioned technical space on 31, the anteroom adjacent to the northeast conference room on 44, the eastern stairwell that nobody used, the hardwired communications terminal on 32. He'd shown her the ventilation grill behind which the timer device had been found, now clean and re-secured. He'd walked her through the isolation switch in the server room and explained how it worked and why it was manual rather than software-controlled. Patricia Chen had taken detailed notes and asked precise questions, and at the end of the walkthrough, had looked at him with the expression of someone who has completed an assessment and reached a conclusion. "I'd like to establish a formal consultation arrangement with maintenance," she said. "Building systems knowledge should be integrated into security protocols rather than existing separately." "Talk to Doug Merritt," Cole said. "He handles departmental arrangements." "I'll talk to Doug Merritt," she said. "But I wanted to speak with you first." Cole recognized what was happening and understood that fighting it entirely was a losing position. "I can answer technical questions when they come up," he said. "I'm not available for operational security work." "Understood," Patricia said, in a way that communicated she'd been expecting that and was fine with it. It was a reasonable outcome. Cole filed it under reasonable outcomes and moved on. He saw Madeline Prescott for the first time since the phone call in early December at a building-wide safety review that the new security protocols required all departmental leads to attend. Cole was there because Patricia Chen had designated maintenance as a departmental participant, which Doug had agreed to after a conversation that Cole hadn't been present for but could infer the shape of. The review was in the large conference room on 38, not the executive floor. A deliberate choice that Cole suspected Madeline had made, for reasons she didn't feel the need to explain to anyone. He arrived 4 minutes before the start time and found a seat at the back of the room, and he was looking at his phone when he heard the room shift slightly, the particular change in ambient sound when someone enters a space and the space reorganizes itself around them. Madeline came in with Patricia Chen and 2 of the new security staff. She was in a gray suit, and her hair was back, and she was in motion, speaking to Patricia about something specific and functional, and she didn't scan the room when she entered the way some executives did the instinctive check of who was present and what that meant. She was focused on the conversation she was having. Then she looked up, doing a routine orientation of the room, and saw Cole at the back. She held his gaze for a moment. A nod minimal. He nodded back. The review lasted 90 minutes. Cole paid attention, which surprised some of the people around him, and which he understood was because they'd expected a maintenance worker to sit in the back and wait for it to be over. The new protocols were thorough and mostly sensible. There were 2 places where he thought the building systems integration was incorrect, one a misunderstanding of how the HVAC access points connected to the security zones, one a gap in the elevator backup protocol that the new installation had introduced by accident. He raised both during the questions segment briefly and specifically, and Patricia Chen noted them both without making anything of the fact that it was the maintenance department raising them rather than the security staff. After the review, while the room cleared, Madeline made her way to the back. She had the particular quality of someone who had intended to do this from the moment she entered and was doing it now without making it into an event. "Cole," she said. "Miss Prescott." She gave him a look that communicated what she thought of that. "How's your arm? Full function, some stiffness. Cold weather?" "Mostly." She nodded. She glanced at the room, which was still emptying, and then back at him. "Lunch," she said. "This week. Not a work conversation." He looked at her. "What kind of conversation?" "The other kind." She said it with the specific level directness that he'd come to understand was how she operated when she wanted something and had decided not to obscure it. I've had 11 months to decide whether I was going to ask. I've decided I am. He considered several responses. He considered the chicken sandwich on Thursdays and the school bus stop and the generally annoying boy named Owen, who had apparently made progress on the colored pencil situation, but had created new problems involving the assignment of partners for a science project. He considered Lily, who had in the past 11 months started reading chapter books on her own and learned to make scrambled eggs and lost a tooth and grown half an inch, and who would, regardless of any of it, continue needing a father who showed up. He also considered that the past 11 months had been, despite everything, the most present he'd felt in a very long time. That something had shifted on the 46th floor that had very little to do with elevators, or server rooms, or manual isolation switches. Thursday, he said. I'm available at noon. Something crossed Madeline Prescott's face, not the professional bearing, not the CEO composure, something smaller and more human than either of those things. The look of a person who has been holding a question for a long time and has just received an answer and is still adjusting to what that means. Thursday at noon, she said. He told Lily about Madeline the way he told Lily about most adult things, not with the manufactured simplicity of someone talking down, but plainly, in the words he would have used if he were describing it to anyone, trusting her to take from it what she could manage and ask about the rest. He told her on a Sunday morning in February, while she was at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and the chapter book she was 3/4 through, which she set face down when she understood that this was a real conversation and not a passing comment. The lady from work, Lily said. Yes, the one whose elevator broke. He'd given her a very edited version of the events at Northstar elevator malfunction, some people behaving badly. Dad helped sort it out. Arm got hurt. All fine now. Lily had accepted this with the pragmatic equanimity of a child who had learned that adults had complicated work lives and that the key variable was whether Dad came home. Dad had come home. She's not just from work, Cole said. We've been talking. Getting to know each other. Lily looked at her cereal. She turned her spoon over once. Do you like her? Yes. Does she know about me? Yes. I've talked about you. Lily processed that. What did you say? That you're 8 years old? That you read chapter books? That you have opinions about colored pencils? Lily's mouth did the thing it did when she was trying not to smile and didn't entirely succeed. It's not that much. It's a start, she looked at him. She had her mother's directness, which he both loved and found genuinely challenging on a regular basis. Is she nice? Cole thought about the question honestly, the way Lily's questions usually required. Nice was not precisely the right word for Madeline Prescott, but it wasn't wrong either. She's direct, he said. She doesn't pretend things are simpler than they are. She's serious about things that deserve to be serious, and she has a sense of humor about the rest. Lily considered this assessment with the gravity it apparently deserved. Is she nice to you? Okay, Lily said and picked her book back up. He waited. He knew her well enough to know that okay was not the conclusion. She read 2 pages. Then, without looking up, can I meet her sometime? When you're ready. I'm not saying I'm ready. I'm asking if I can when I am. Yes, he said, when you are. She turned a page. The Sunday morning continued around them. The lunch on Thursday was at a restaurant 2 blocks from Northstar Madeline's suggestion, a place that was busy enough to be unremarkable and quiet enough to be functional. She was there when he arrived, which he'd half expected. She had water and a menu, and she looked up when he came in with the specific attention of someone who has been doing something else and has stopped doing it completely. They talked for 2 hours, not about Northstar mostly, not about Travis or the investigation or the federal proceedings, which were still ongoing and would be for some time. They talked about other things her early life, which had been shaped by the weight of a family company she'd been preparing to lead since before she'd had the vocabulary to describe what that preparation was. His time in the Navy, which he talked about with the careful selectivity of someone who knows which parts are stories and which parts are still too embedded to be narrated. Lily, about whom he talked with the specific, unself-conscious specificity of a parent who has stopped trying to perform parenthood for other people's approval. Madeline listened to the Lily conversation the way she listened to most things fully, without the partial attention of someone composing their next thought while the other person was still talking. She sounds like a real person, Madeline said. She is. I mean, fully formed. 8-year-old people are sometimes just summarized when adults talk about them. Cole looked at her. She has opinions about things. Strong ones. About what specifically? Currently, the science project partner situation, and whether hot dogs are sandwiches. Where does she land on the hot dogs question? Firmly no. She's considered her position. Madeline's actual laugh, not the almost law. The real one arrived without warning and was considerably warmer than her professional demeanor suggested. He noted that. They were not people who moved fast by disposition. Both of them had learned, through different routes, that moving fast in the direction of something you wanted was a way of bypassing the information you needed about whether you actually wanted it. So there was nothing resolved at that lunch, nothing declared or committed to, but when they left the restaurant and stood on the sidewalk in the February cold, Madeline said that she'd like to do this again, and Cole said that he would too, and they went back to their respective days with the particular quality of people who have started something that they intend to be careful with. The first major court hearing in the Travis Kincaid case was held in March. Cole attended as a witness, testified for 40 minutes in the morning session, and was cross-examined for another 20 by Travis's defense attorney, who attempted several times to establish that Cole's military background constituted a conflict of interest in his account of events and failed to make the argument land because the argument was constructed wrong, and the attorney seemed to know it by the third attempt. He saw Travis Kincaid across the courtroom for the first time since the 44th floor conference room. Travis looked older. Not diminished, he still carried himself with the particular quality of a man who believed in his own competence, but the months had done something to him that Cole recognized as the specific erosion of a person who's carefully constructed. Architecture has been taken apart piece by piece and who is learning, in real time, what they're made of underneath it. Travis looked at Cole once, across the room, and Cole held the look without any particular expression and then looked at the witness stand, which was where he needed to be. After his testimony, he called Lily from the courthouse steps. She was at school, but he left a voicemail that she'd hear at dismissal, just that he'd had a work thing this morning, and everything was fine, and he'd be at the bus stop at the regular time. He was at the bus stop at the regular time. In April, the Department of Defense issued formal corrections to the service files of Petty Officer First Class Daniel Reeves and Chief Petty Officer Marcus Obey. The corrections documented that the compromise of their final mission had originated in a pre-mission communications protocol breach, not an operational failure during the mission itself. The cause of death was reclassified. The performance assessments connected to the incident were amended. Their families were notified through the process Admiral Pierce had described appropriately, through official channels, with the care that the situation required. Cole was not present for those notifications. He learned that they had happened through a brief message from Pierce, who had been monitoring the process and kept Cole informed without overwhelming him with details that weren't his to carry. He read the message at his kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, while Lily was in the next room doing the homework she'd been putting off since she got home. He sat with it for a long time. He thought about Danny Reeves, who had been from a small town in Ohio and had a habit of narrating everything he cooked in the tone of a cooking show host for reasons that had never been fully explained and that everyone had found simultaneously irritating and endearing. He thought about Marcus Obey, who had been from Houston, who had 3 younger sisters he talked about constantly, who had a specific and elaborate theory about the correct way to pack a rucksack that Cole had argued with and had later come to believe was entirely right. He thought about them as men whole, specific, irreplaceable men, rather than as a weight he'd been carrying or a debt he'd believed he owed. It was the first time in 9 years that the thinking had that quality, and he recognized the difference clearly enough to name it. He wasn't absolved of anything. That wasn't the word for it, and it wasn't the thing he needed. What he had was something smaller and more durable, the knowledge that what he'd believed about himself, the specific, corrosive belief that his failure had put them in the ground, had been constructed on false information. He hadn't known it was false at the time. He'd carried it in good faith. Carrying something in good faith for 9 years, and then learning it was wrong, didn't mean the carrying hadn't happened. It meant the thing you'd been carrying wasn't what you thought it was. He could put it down differently now. That was all. That was enough. Lily came into the kitchen for a snack and saw him at the table and stopped. "Are you okay?" she said, not alarmed. "Just checking." "Yes," he said. "Come here." She came to the table and he put his arm around her shoulders, and she tolerated this with the slightly dramatic patience of an 8-year-old who considers prolonged affection mildly inconvenient but fundamentally acceptable. "Dad," she said, "yeah, I finished the math." I didn't finish the reading. You have time. She leaned against him for a moment, the particular lean of a child who is checking that the weight is still there, that the person is still solid, and then straightened and went to get her snack. He sat at the table a little longer. Northstar's new safety training center opened in June. It had been Madeline's initiative from the beginning, not as a response to the incident specifically, but as a structural commitment to building a culture where safety knowledge wasn't siloed inside specific departments and withheld from others. The center occupied the third floor of the adjacent building, which Northstar had leased for the purpose, and it had been designed with input from building systems maintenance, security, and operations in equal measure, which was a departure from how those departments had previously related to each other. Cole had contributed to the design in the limited specific way that Patricia Chen and Madeline had agreed on building systems consultation, not organizational leadership. He'd reviewed the training modules that covered mechanical systems and had flagged 3 places where the instruction was technically incorrect and 11 places where it was technically correct but would be misunderstood by someone. Without practical background, and needed to be rewritten. The module writers had rewritten all 11. The opening was a morning event, a ribbon cutting, that Madeline characterized in her invitation as brief and functional, which it was. There were perhaps 60 people present, a mix of Northstar staff and external partners, and the training center looked like what it was. A practical, well-equipped space where people were going to learn things. Cole stood near the back of the main training room while Madeline spoke. She talked about what the center was for and what it wasn't. She was specific and unsentimental about both, and she said something near the end that he'd heard her working on in pieces over the past few months in the course of conversations that had gradually moved from cautious to something easier. She said that the events of the previous year had demonstrated that the most dangerous assumption an organization could make was that protection was someone else's job. That the people who understood how a building actually functioned, not how it was supposed to function on paper, but how it worked in practice, on an ordinary Tuesday were carrying knowledge that had institutional value, whether the institution recognized it or not. That ignoring that knowledge didn't make the organization safer. It just made the organization ignorant of its own vulnerabilities. She didn't reference the incident directly. She didn't name Cole. He hadn't asked her not to. She'd simply made the judgment that the point was stronger without the specific narrative, and she was right, and he appreciated that she'd understood it without him having to explain it. After the formal part ended and people moved into the facility for tours, Madeline came toward the back of the room where Cole was standing. She had the low-grade relief of someone who has finished a public obligation they'd been preparing for, and underneath it, something more specific satisfaction, but the kind that comes from work that deserved doing, rather than an outcome that happened to go well. Good, he said. Good, she said, I think. The point about institutional knowledge. Too obvious? No. Right amount of obvious. She looked at him. 4 months of Thursday lunches and several dinners, and one afternoon in a park where he'd brought Lily, who had met Madeline with the specific careful assessment of an 8-year-old evaluating a situation that matters to her father, and had concluded after 45 minutes that Madeline was acceptable, which Cole understood was a strong result from Lily on first contact. They stood in the training center while the room moved around them. I want to ask you something, Madeline said. All right. The advisory position. The civilian one, 3 days a week. She'd redesigned the offer 3 months ago, after he'd declined the chief security officer role a second time. 3 days a week, building systems and security integration consulting. Weekends entirely free, no on-call expectation, no organizational management. He'd said he'd think about it. He'd been thinking about it. Yes, he said. She looked at him. Yes, you'll think about it, or yes. Yes, I'll take it, he said. She held his gaze. He could see her doing the same thing she'd done in the corridor on 31. On a much smaller scale, the adjustment, the recalibration, the update to a picture she'd been holding. You've been thinking about it this whole time. Since February. And you're deciding now. I decided when I heard you talk about building systems knowledge having institutional value, he said. It seemed like a reasonable employer position. She made the almost law. He'd gotten good at knowing the difference between when it was coming and when it wasn't. 3 days a week, she said. 3 days a week. Every weekend free. And you'll still do the maintenance work. Part-time. I talked to Doug. He's fine with the reduced schedule. She nodded. She looked at the room, the training center. the 60 people moving through it, the practical, well-lit space where people were going to learn things that might someday matter in ways they couldn't anticipate. Then she looked back at him with the specific quality that had been building across 4 months of Thursday lunches and park afternoons and evenings where they'd been careful with each other in the way that people who have both been hurt by carelessness tend to be. Lily asked me something last week, Madeline said. He knew Lily had been talking to Madeline on her own, in the text messages that Lily had initiated after the park afternoon and that Cole had been informed of, but had stayed out of, understanding that Lily needed to build that relationship on her own terms or not at all. What did she ask? He said. She asked if I knew how to make grilled cheese. Madeline paused. I told her I knew the general theory but had limited practical experience. She said she'd teach me. Cole looked at her. I told her I'd like that, Madeline said. He'd known from a fairly early point that the question about Lily wasn't whether Madeline could handle the complexity of that situation. It was whether she understood what the complexity actually was, that Lily wasn't an obstacle or a responsibility to be accommodated, but the central fact of Cole's life, the person around whom everything else organized itself, the reason he'd made every decision he'd made since the morning 4 years ago when he'd come home to an apartment that had someone in it who needed him more than he knew how to account for. Madeline had understood that without being told. She'd understood it in the same way she understood building systems knowledge, not because someone had made her a diagram, but because she'd paid attention to what was actually in front of her. I'll bring the bread, Cole said. She looked at him. For the grilled cheese lesson, he said. The bread matters more than people think. Her actual laugh arrived, full and unguarded, and the training center was bright around them, and outside the windows the city was doing what it always did. 5 of Northstar's security staff were now instructors at the training center. Cole recognized most of them from the demonstration on the morning of the incident, including Morrison, the man who'd told him to clear the area before everything changed. Morrison taught the building systems integration module, which Cole had consulted on, and he was, by Patricia Chen's account, a good instructor. Cole crossed paths with him in the training center on a Thursday in July, both of them arriving for overlapping purposes, Cole for a consultation on a module revision, Morrison to set up for an afternoon session. Morrison stopped. There was a brief, functional pause of the kind that happens between people who share a history that neither of them would describe as comfortable. Good module, Cole said, meaning the building systems 1. Morrison looked at him. You wrote half of it. I consulted on it. You wrote it. Morrison seemed to be deciding something. He was not a man given to gestures which Cole had gathered from the incident and from subsequent limited interaction. The door thing, Morrison said. On the 46th floor, when we told you to clear the area. You were doing your job, Cole said. We didn't know who you were. Nobody did. That's not an excuse. Cole looked at him. No, but it's a reason. There's a difference. Morrison held his gaze for a moment and then nodded, once, with the specific economy of a man who considers that a complete exchange on the subject. It was. On the last evening of July, Cole picked up Lily from the school's summer program. She'd been doing a 2-week science camp that she'd been ambivalent about until the 3rd day, at which point she'd become enthusiastically committed to a project involving the growth rates of different types of lettuce, and they walked home instead of driving, because the evening was the specific kind of warm that made walking worthwhile. Lily talked about the lettuce. He listened to all of it. At the corner 2 blocks from their apartment, she stopped, the way she sometimes stopped when she had something to say that she'd been organizing during the walking. Dad. Yeah. Are you happy? He looked at her. She was looking at the sidewalk, then up at him, with the particular directness of a child who has decided to ask a real question and is committed to a real answer. He thought about the question, honestly. He thought about the building on the 46th floor and the 2 men he'd carried for 9 years, and the weight he'd set down differently, and the compression wrap and the radiologist and the grilled cheese and the park afternoon and the training center and the Thursday lunches and the letter about Danny and Marcus and the 3 days a week and the weekends free. He thought about standing in a maintenance corridor in the dark with a woman he barely knew, and the specific moment he'd understood that the work he'd spent 9 years trying to leave behind wasn't a thing you left behind, it was a thing you found a different way to carry. He thought about this sidewalk in the specific July warmth, with his daughter standing beside him, asking the right question. Yes, he said, mostly. What's the mostly? The stiffness in my arm when it's cold. She considered this. That's not a big mostly. No, he said, it really isn't. She took his hand, the way she'd started doing again. Recently, she'd gone through a phase of not wanting to, which he'd understood, and now she did again, which he understood equally. They walked the last 2 blocks home. He thought, somewhere in those 2 blocks, about what it meant to have arrived somewhere, without knowing you'd been in transit. Not a destination in any clean sense. The accounting wasn't done. The stiffness would come back in November. Lily would be 9 in the fall, and then 10, and then something he couldn't picture yet. And all of it would require navigation that he couldn't chart in advance. But the difference between surviving a thing and actually choosing to live after it, that was the distance he'd covered. And it was not a short distance. And he'd covered most of it not in some dramatic reckoning, but in grilled cheese and school bus stops and lunch breaks and fault codes and the slow, accumulating weight of ordinary days that he'd shown up for. There was a version of Cole Vance who had gone into Northstar Aeronautics that morning as a man doing his job with the particular invisible efficiency of someone who had decided to take up as little space as possible. That version had been protecting himself from further loss, from the cost of being visible, from the risk of being someone who mattered enough to hurt again. He didn't know exactly when that had changed. He suspected it had started in a maintenance shaft, on a cable he'd strung from memory, with the emergency brake engaging under his hands, and the sound like a gunshot that had meant the car was stopping, and the woman inside it was going to be alive. He'd run toward the elevator because someone was going to die if he didn't, and that was simply true. And he was a person who ran toward those things regardless of what it cost him. But he'd come out of the building differently, and the difference was the thing worth keeping. Lily squeezed his hand at the front door of their building. Squeezed back. They went inside. The evening was warm, and the city continued around them. And tomorrow was a workday 3 days a week now. The ordinary machinery of building systems and security integration and fault codes that needed clearing, and after that, the weekend, which was entirely free. He intended to use it.